I like giving classes on things that I'm really good at, or at least have a modicum of talent at, something like that. And I'm awful at the thing that we're going to talk about today. I know we hear preachers oftentimes say, I write sermons, or I'm going to talk about this thing because it's something I need to work on. This is something I need to work on. And it's something, honestly, we all need to work on, and it's communication. So when I told Caitlin, hey, I'm going to give a sermon on communication, she was like, yes, you need to do that. And there are multiple forms of communication. But what we're going to talk about today, in particular, is one-on-one verbal communication, because we communicate in a multitude of ways, right? For the most part, we use all of our senses at all times whenever we're communicating, except for taste. We don't really go around licking people because that would be inappropriate, right? So when I say I'm bad at communication, I mean I'm not particularly good at one-on-one verbal communication. I know I'm not. Scott and I were having a conversation Wednesday night about being passive-aggressive, those types of things. And I said, I'm not passive-aggressive. I am passive up to the point that I'm aggressive, right? And I know that about myself, and I recognize that about myself. And some people would stop there and say, that's just how I am, and never strive to be any better. I'm going to give you one freak. When people say just, I'm just, you need to ask them what they mean with that just. What do you mean by just? Because there's a lot that hangs out in there. If I say I'm just that way, that means, hey, I'm too lazy, or I don't care about you enough to try and change. Right? If I say that I'm just going to be a few minutes, it's going to be 20 minutes, right? Or I'm just going to be an hour, I'm going to be a couple hours, right? Or I just had one bowl of ice cream. Yes, I just had one bowl of ice cream, plus a sandwich, plus a pie, plus all these, right? So there's a lot that hangs out in that just. And so whenever anybody says I just to you, you make sure you're paying attention to what's in that just and ask yourself, what's in that just? So in the next 20-25 minutes, we're going to talk about communication. I'm going to tell you things that you already know, because we all know how to be better communicators for the most part. Okay? I'm going to tell you things that you should always do in order to be a better communicator. And I'm going to share verses with you that you've probably heard. And at the end of the lesson, my hope is that you'll take and you'll think about it for a bit, you'll ruminate on it, and then you'll come back and you'll become a better communicator, because we all need to communicate better. Right? Particularly because at some point, it's going to come up where someone comes to you and they need to talk to you about salvation. Right? And that's usually not going to be a big group talk. It's going to start in a group. It'll start in a place like this. But then it's going to be a one-on-one talk. And you need to be able to talk to them. And you need to understand what's between you and them. Okay. So I was real explicit and talked about the type and kind of communication because, again, there are multiple forms of communication. The way that I'm communicating with you right now, it's usually like, A-to-B conversation, right? I'm giving you a message and I'm hoping that you receive it. And I kind of adjust depending on how you are all acting. I taught for about 10 years. And when you see the class start to glaze over, it's like, hey, it's time to take a break, right? So even though I'm giving you the message, I'm hoping you receive it, there's some things that I got to pay attention to. Make sure you're still receiving it. So, we're talking about one-on-one verbal communication. We're going to look at the Bible, particularly Proverbs. We just finished up with Solomon, right? Learning about Solomon and all those wise words that he said. Solomon had a lot of communication in Proverbs, had a lot of verses in Proverbs that talk about communication. About 30% of the book of Proverbs deals with communication. Why is that? It's because communication is hard, and we're all pretty bad at it, right? And we all need to improve. Okay? So that's why he's the wisest man that ever lived was talking about communication so much, because of how important it is. What we're going to talk about is, one, how to remove those barriers, and then we'll talk about other things that you should always do. All right? Next one. We get to play the blocks after service. So. Okay. So these blocks are not always things that we are conscious of. Okay, we all have been through stuff. And that stuff makes it difficult for us to communicate. So we have to be honest with ourselves and say, I'm going to have a difficult time communicating sometimes. We have to be honest with the receiver, saying, hey, I'm going to have a difficult time with the message that you're trying to get me. Okay? And we need to, in that honesty, make sure that we're not hiding things or being receptive. Okay? So it's important to first be honest. Okay? Second, to be intentional in every time that we speak to someone. Third, to be hardworking. Okay? Communication is difficult, and it takes work. You can't just go in and do it. Okay? You can't be passive about communicating. Even when you're just the receiver, you can't be passive about communication. Next is being silent / being patient. And finally, it's being responsible. Okay. So in order to be honest, again, we have to be honest with ourselves first. We have to be honest with the person who we're having a conversation with about the intent of the conversation. And it's funny that in society, we oftentimes say things like, well, to be honest, or I'm going to tell you the truth, or I'm not going to lie, or I'm going to keep it 100, or true talk. Like, right, we say all these things, and why do we say that? Why do we feel the need to say those things? It's because we are used to messages that are somewhat deceptive, right? We expect people to lie to us. And it's because we don't tell ourselves the truth when we talk. That other person we're not expecting to be honest. Telling the truth, we're afraid of what's going to happen. What are the consequences of telling the truth? Right? So Proverbs 10:20, the tongue of the righteous is choice silver. The heart of the wicked is of little worth. If your intent in going into a conversation is to be dishonest, that conversation is not of its worth, right? It doesn't have merit. So we have to be careful. Okay? And there are so many ways that we can be dishonest. You can be dishonest in your intent in having a conversation. How many times have you had a conversation with somebody and you think it's about one thing, but then they okey doke and they come back and they're like, well, actually it's about something completely different. They start that conversation and they're not being honest brokers, and they're saying, well, it's about this thing. Okay, no it's not. And you knew it wasn't when you started the conversation. You think you're going to win somebody over to God and change the way that they view things and say, hey, look, your salvation is important. If you start a conversation, you're not being honest about it. I'm not saying that you got to start off with the plan of salvation, but you have to start off showing that you care, and you have to be honest with it. It's not about my message, it's about the message that God wants me to give to you. That makes sense? And then we have to be careful too, when we're talking about being honest, and I've done this before, that when you start to lose face, or when you start to kind of like, the conversation's just not going the way you want it to go, don't shift the goalpost. Right? No. Well, what I actually meant was, is it what you actually meant, or are you changing things because you feel like you're losing that argument? So first, be honest, okay? Proverbs 12:17. Whoever speaks truth and gives honest evidence, but a false witness utters deceit. So be honest. A good way to avoid feeling that you have to be dishonest is to be intentional with your messaging. What do I mean by be intentional with your messaging? Kind of brings me to like our second analogy here. The second analogy is about marksmanship. Okay. I start off in the Marine Corps. Every Marine is a rifleman, right? We all learn how to shoot. You do not make it through boot camp unless you learn how to shoot. When you are talking to someone, Michael talked about this a little bit, you have to be intentional in what you are saying to them. So be honest and be intentional in what you're saying. What is the purpose of the conversation? What is the purpose of what you're trying to say to them? Because you can't hit a target if you're aiming at several targets. Well, I want to do this, and this. Or I want to have a conversation, but I'm paying attention to 30 other different things, or I'm paying attention to my phone, and I'm paying attention to the thing that I've got to do later. You can't be intentional and have a conversation with somebody if you're focused on a lot of different things, okay? And so in marksmanship, we're taught to focus, right? One target. Focus on that single target at a time, okay? Because you can't hit multiple targets at one time. You shoot through one target, but you still got to go through that first target to get to the second target, to the third, and so forth, okay? So, it means that you have to be observant, and you have to focus on being observant. Pay attention to what that person is doing. Pay attention to how they're receiving your message. You might have to adjust. So, And you have to craft your words in a special way. Not everybody's going to receive things the same way. The way that I talk to Michael is not the same way that I talk to my kids, which is not the same way that I talk to my wife. Ecclesiastes 5:2. Do not rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be hasty to utter a word before God. For God is in heaven and you are on earth. Therefore let your words be few. It's not saying don't talk a lot, which we'll get to in a minute. What it's saying is choose your words wisely. Be intentional in what you say. Be intentional in your application. Okay? So, first, be honest. Second, be intentional in what you're saying. Third, be hardworking. Again, communication takes work. It takes a lot of work. And it's not just communication between you and your spouse. Yes, that takes work. But it's communication between you and your kids. It's communication between you and your friends. It's communication with those on the outside. It's when you're trying to bring someone to Christ. It's that communication. And you have to really work hard at it. You have to craft your message. You can't be deceitful, but you still need to be careful, right? Because everything you say is going to have ramifications. It's going to affect your relationship later on with that person. If you talk to somebody and you say something and that thing hurts them, what's going to happen immediately? I'm going to shut down. Your tone. That has an effect on things, right? I talk to the kids and I use a really aggressive tone. Why'd you do that? Kid freezes up immediately. She saw her perk up, right? So, well, what did I do? Right? They freeze up immediately. It's because you're. Are you trying to figure out why they did that, or do you think you know why they did that thing already? Are you trying to figure out how that person works, or do you think you know how they work already? You've already made your assumptions, and you're just trying to get to the part where you get to talking. Communication's tough. We have to work at it, right? Caitlin and the girls are fantastic at picking the worst times to have a conversation. So I think. But if I really sit down and really look at it, and I really say, okay, are they? Or are they ready to talk right now? And that time that they're ready to talk may be at a time where I'm in the middle of doing something for work. Or when we're getting out of the car. That's my favorite one, right? But can I put in the work? Can I sit there and say, you matter. This conversation matters. We got time. Work can wait. Turn the car back on. Turn the AC back up, right? Kids are sleeping in the back. We can have this conversation right now. Because it matters. Because I'm willing to do the work. Because they're ready. It doesn't mean that that's always going to happen. There are times where things are pressing. We got to handle it right now. Okay? Ice cream is melting in the back. Let me just go put this. But it's at that time that we have that good one-on-one communication. Say, I can't talk about this right now. We'll talk about it later. If we look at Christ and the way that he managed things and the way that he had conversations, he was always, it takes work, right? If we look at Colossians 4:6, let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Okay? Each person is different. You have to craft your message for that person. All right, which brings us to 5 and 6-ish, because I said be patient and be silent. Okay. We've all heard the verse, James 1:19. Beloved is know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to what? Hear and slow to listen. There's that old saying, God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, so we can listen twice as much as we speak. It's important. It's important that when you're having a conversation, you let silence ride. Okay? Because there's a lot that happens in that silence. If you're talking to a person who's uncomfortable with silence, they're going to reveal a whole lot. They're just going to keep rambling, right? Just keep talking. And you'll learn a lot about that person if you just listen. Okay? If you and another person just aren't really talkers, it gives you time to marinate on all those things that have been said. And you say, okay, maybe I said something I shouldn't have said there, or I see you're shutting down here, or let's adjust the message. I want to make sure that you're receiving things in the proper way. So we have to make sure that we let that silence be there. It was one of those things that when you're going through officer candidate school, they teach you, it's like, here's a tactic for when you're dealing with people. State the problem, and then be quiet. Hey, shut up like the formation. You just stand there. It works with kids too. Not as well, but it works with kids because sometimes they just freak out and they just don't know what to do. But like, hey, this is broken. Why? Same thing. And it works with grown-ups. Ask a question and then just wait for the answer. Okay? Give it time. And don't be in such a rush, because I know Caitlin loves it when I do this, to anticipate what somebody else is saying, what they're about to say. Because when you're anticipating what someone else is about to say, that tells them, I want this conversation to be over. I don't really care what you have to say, I'm just trying to move this thing right along. No one wants that. That's not a conversation. That's just you trying to get through something. Okay? That's not communication. Okay. Which brings us to the final part of communication, something that we should always do, and that's take ownership. Everything that we say, we have to own at the end of it. That means if you come back, or somebody comes back and say, hey, what you said hurt me, you need to take ownership of it. That means that sometimes we're going to miss the mark. And we need to be able to adjust our conversation, learn from it, and come back and talk to that person in maybe a different way. Okay, last week I said something, I didn't really mean it to come out that way. Let me tell you how this happened. Adjust. Move on. Okay? Because, as I said in the beginning, there is going to come a time where we're having a conversation with somebody, a conversation about salvation. And the words that you say, like Michael was talking about earlier, you're not responsible for that person's soul and their final decision of whether they come to Christ or not. That is not your responsibility. If you fail in something you say, that's not your burden. You deliver the message. But the way you deliver the message has to be with salt. Has to be the same. You have to choose the right words, because if you choose the wrong words, if you're using the word of God as a bludgeon to say, you're doing wrong, you need to fix your life, you need to come to Jesus. How many people are you going to win over with that? I see you hurting. I see you drinking a lot. I see you doing all these things. What's going on? How can I help? Choosing the right words makes all of the difference. Being able to have that one-on-one communication, to send and receive, to remove all the barriers, and talk to someone openly, can be the difference between that person spending eternity in hell and that person spending eternity with you in heaven. So, maybe you're having a tough time right now. Maybe you want some stuff, and maybe you need to talk to somebody. Maybe you haven't accepted Christ, and you need to do that now. So what I invite you to do is, if you need to talk about anything, if you need to talk about Christ, if you need to talk about, hey, I'm having some difficulties in my life and I really just appreciate an open ear, come now as we stand and sing.